Good morning, everybody. Hello and welcome to Things Fund. Welcome to the second of the Centre for Ageing Better's breakfast events, Mind Digital Care. My name is Dan Jones. I work for the Centre for Ageing Better, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here. You're going to hear some really excellent speakers and hopefully have an interesting and lively discussion about their perspectives and about some of the topics in this area of supporting people to get the most out of digital in later life. So the Centre for Ageing Better is the foundation for everyone to enjoy a good later life. So we are interested in digital inclusion and people being online because of the benefits that can bring to people. But there are still 5 million people, nearly 4.8 million people over 55 who are not online. That number goes down, but it's there's a big chunk of people who are not looking likely to get online. And even the people who are online, what we see is as more activity becomes online only, or better online, cheaper online, quicker online, then people who are a bit online, that becomes not so great. So one of the things that we found out is a lot of people will, for example, use Facebook or email, but they won't bank online. So as some services become much easier or almost only possible to do online, even being a bit online still leaves you missing out. So the framing for our discussion, the framing for our issues is how do we make sure that people don't miss out? And that's what I think each of our panelists is going to talk about in a different way. We became interested in this, so we funded Good Things, and James from Good Things is here, to understand how we can better support people to get the benefits of online. We have here our report. There are copies at the back, so anybody that is interested in seeing what we found out, you can do that. We're not going to talk in great detail about the findings, although James is going to show us some of the insights, but we're going to ask a range of people to discuss this question: how can we tackle digital exclusion in later life? Or in plain English, how can we help people who are in later life get the benefits that are available online? And we're going to ask you this question as well. So, some of you I think might have already seen this, ta-da! But we have a live web opportunity for you to give us your comments and thoughts. So, if you go to slido.com on your connected device, if you have a connected device, then you will find a website and it will ask you to enter an event code in that little box. If you type in digital gap with no spaces, then it will take you to a page where you can ask questions or give comments. And what we're going to ask you to do now, or in the next few minutes, is to answer our question. So we're interested in everybody's answers to our question: how can we tackle digital exclusion in later life? In a relatively short, I've got to read them all, so if you could make it shorter rather than longer, say 5 words, that would be ideal. And we'll have a look at a few, and we will have a look at whether over the course of the morning you change your mind. So we'll be asking you later to answer the question again. If you're watching this live stream, if you're watching this remotely, you should be seeing the same thing now, and you can also give your comments and questions through Slido if you're not in the room. So I'm going to stop talking and introduce you to our panelists. We have Joyce Williams, also known as Grandma Williams, a blogger who came to digital in later life, so is an example of one of the people who has embraced the benefits of being online. James Richardson, the research manager at Good Things Foundation, who managed the research that led us to set this event up. Robin Christopherson, head of digital inclusion at AbilityNet. Anne Rimmer, director of customer vulnerability, and Danny Simmons, who is a digital eagle who works for Barclays. So we will ask each of these people in turn to come up and give us an introductory talk, give their perspective on this question: how can we help people who in later life get the benefits of digital? So I will hand over to them, and then there'll be an opportunity for all of us to get into a discussion. So I'm starting with Joyce.
Okay. Well, I'm Joyce Williams, and I'm 82-year-old. But what, of course, you say when you're 82 is I'm nearly 83. It's the kind of thing you do when you get older. You either pick one. I'm also known as Grandma Williams because when I took up blogging, they told me I had to find some kind of voice name. And my grandchildren at that time had drawn a picture of me in the nursery school with a little skeletal figure with a stick, as it were, and they put underneath Grandma Williams. Now they really meant me who walked up hills, but in fact it was quite a good one to use as a name, so I chose that. I was quite old and retired when the internet appeared and everything went online, so I'm an example of the people who have had to go through a learning experience that many of you have not had to go through. You were sort of born with it, it grew up with you. It was not something you had to learn from scratch. However, I was a writer, I love writing, and I'm a very curious person. I'm really always asking questions. So I thought I'll have a go at this if I can, and I managed to get online by asking various people. But I only found I was using it for my uses because I wrote, it was emails, and because I was curious, it was Google. And I didn't really go much further than that because that makes me fit very well one of the categories that the report has shown. They've divided the people who use the internet or don't use the internet into 4 categories. And one of the categories shows people who positively wish to use it and are actually engaged in it. And that would be me. But on the other hand, I'm still a very limited user. For example, last night I spent a bit of time alone in the hotel, so I played about with trying to do pic collage, which I've never tried. I managed it. So that was a bit of breakthrough. On the other hand, when I came down and they wanted my e-ticket, I didn't actually know how to get that off the phone. And then the man scanned it, and I thought, I don't actually know how you use this scanning thing. So there's a limit to what I am doing. For example, if I now go around a museum and they've got those little check things, I don't actually know what to do with them. So I'm losing out because I haven't learned how to do that. However, I did get myself on to the idea of blogging because I thought I've been writing letters to editors for years and they never get published. But if I actually get a blog, I can publish it. So I happened to see a thing that said blogging for beginners, and I was so lucky. It's one of those doors in life that happens to open, and you just go through it and life's changed, but you don't know it's going to happen like that. But what it was a class that actually started at the beginning. When I walked in, I was 80, all the others were 30 or less. So I asked one of the first questions, well, what actually is a blog? Now, they all knew, but I had heard of the word blog, but I didn't actually know what it was, how you did it. I just knew it was writing online. That's as far as I got. And they were brilliant. They took me from that point about how do you set up a website, the whole lot, the things I needed to do it. That was 18 months ago. So I got online and started blogging, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And what I was blogging about was life in old age. They said, you need a voice, you need a place, you need something to write about. I said, well, the media's full of rubbish about old age, how rotten it is, how miserable it is, how doom and gloom. Somebody needs to say how positive it is and what a wonderful thing it is to have made it to 80 years and be living a great life. And it needs saying. So I decided to do that blog. Well, it seems to have got me here because I've got old age better, which has been great. So for me, I have made that journey. Now that's the category of engaged, but only engaged in a way that suits me. I'm not prepared to necessarily go online and do online banking. It's too much hassle, it's too much trouble, I can't be bothered. I'd rather just ring up and buy a train ticket and talk to somebody. I don't want that hassle. It's too difficult for me, but I'll do it if I have to. But unless it's made easy, I am not going to move that way. And a large number of people out there, my friends in colleagues, people, professors and all sorts, say, oh, I don't do it, my son does it for me. They've got their own way of doing things, they know how to do it, they can live life comfortably without the internet, so they aren't going to bother. I'm never sure we'll ever convert them, they're not going to. However, there are people who have a go and they get very disheartened. In many ways I have. I've given up on all sorts of bits of things I thought I might try. It was just too difficult. there are a whole group who say, I'm not interested, not for me, I don't want to be on the internet, it's risky, everything. But when you hear what there's a hidden message is, it scares me. I am frightened, and I'm frightened with fear. I'm frightened of the jargon. I do not understand it. It is a language I do not speak. I cannot speak, and I find very difficult to hear. I teach bridge. I teach bridge to all people. And I teach to people who've never played cards before. And I have to start at the beginning. We have to define what the word trump is, because they have alternative meanings to the word trump. And that is so much so for the internet. A lot of the words that are used on the internet have alternative meanings that we already have. What's patch, what's paste? And they expect us to use it. And the technology even, if you teach somebody who's old to open an iPad and say, well, let's get you on Google, open the iPad. How do you switch it on? There's no action, well, that might, you press that button. We'll say tap Google, tap. Now, to me, but the word tap is that, whereas in fact what you need is press. And they don't know the difference. It says tap Google, well, what's Google? A little square thing with a G on. What's that? It's an app. What's an app? You'll immediately stop. Every word has to be redefined because you don't know them. You speak them automatically. They're just part of your language, and I immediately have to say, what's that? You know, I feel a fool. I feel an idiot. I feel dim. I don't want to do it. It's scary. And I just don't want to bother. At the same time, I'm feeling guilty and miserable because I'm left behind, and you're in the world I'm not in. And that is also a problem. So there's an element of, I don't want to risk, I'm reading all this stuff on the paper about data, I don't think I want to do all that, you know, somebody might hack in. And at the same time, this fear of being a fool. And you go to your family and say, just show me how to do this. So they show you, so you understood it. And I explained to my bridge class something, and they understood it. Next morning, we'd play it again, they'd forgotten it. Same with me if the family explain it. So they say, oh, well, I'll do it for you. So then I start feeling a helpless old lady. And they see me as a helpless old lady. But what I actually need for teaching is repetition, 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 and everything translated into English. Now, then I can learn. So what the problem is, that things come, like museums bring in these little checkered things and put them on things. They never tell me what they are or how I'm supposed to use them or teach me to use them. That is missing. We're just expected to teach ourselves, and for old people that's almost impossible. So we're being socially excluded because of that kind of thing. So the words I want to leave you with are a series of F words. Fear, being a fool, getting fed up, F with a few X's after it. Family are not necessarily the best teachers. What you do need for teaching are people, friends who will understand you, recognise your problems and be helpful, have the time and have the patience. And they maybe a little group of friends, self-teaching with just somebody who's a mentor. What you don't actually want is a formal class, because the formal class starts at A, goes to B, goes to C. I've already forgotten A by the time we've got to C, so it doesn't work for me. I need the slow repetition and so on. The benefits, though, of being on the internet have been enormous. I have so enjoyed it. Now I've got Google, it's just magic. I mean, I used to spend my life opening Encyclopedia Britannica or going to the library to look something up. Now, minutes, gorgeous, seconds, it's gorgeous. I've been in contact with the world. I'm absolutely delighted when I open my WordPress account and see people in New Zealand and Israel and Australia are all talking to me, and that is absolutely wonderful to be in. And what I am wanting to say about old age is going all around the world, and they're coming back saying, yeah, whatever. That's right, and that is absolutely super. And the social contact is great. Skype is great. I talked to my grandson in Taiwan on Skype. But an old lady said to me the other day, well, I talked to my grandson on Skype, but I'd really rather phone them. And I said, why is that? She said, well, my hair might be a mess or my... you can understand that element too. You know, she's got something she likes doing. Somebody else said, I don't want internet banking. I said, why? Well, I'd rather walk to the bank. I need the exercise anyway, and I'd rather talk to a person. So, you know, you're not going to get necessarily past those barriers. They make sense to them. But the whole social internet, I had to learn Twitter and Facebook in order to promote my blog. I wouldn't have done it otherwise, but I find it great. I enjoy it. I'm going to tweet every day, a little bit of something. Don't do much on Facebook, but tweeting's great fun. But those are the positives. The negatives, it seems to me, is the time waste when you don't understand it, the frustration and the anger being pushed into this system that you don't want to use, can't use, nobody's prepared to teach you how to use, and you're stuck with it. And that is really the negative, and why a lot of people are not there on the internet. Right. My advice to older people would be expect help. Expect understanding, expect retailers and businesses and the government and the NHS. If they want you online, they've jolly well got to translate it into English and make it simple. I think I'll leave it at that.
So thank you very much, Joyce. That was me. Sorry. I should have said, because given the purpose of the thing, I should have said, if you haven't got a connected device but you do want to comment, do put your hand up, and one of my colleagues will give you a piece of paper, and you can write your comment on that. But I'm now going to hand over to James Richardson from Good Things Foundation, who's going to speak a little bit about some of the things that we found out together.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for neatly introducing what I wanted to talk about, because if you're sticking your hand up and asking for a piece of paper, you are asking for an offline alternative. Being online is not an outcome. As a practitioner, I think about outcomes, outcome frameworks. Being online is a means to an end. And what I found repeatedly when I was conducting the field research for I Am Connected, the report that we wrote for the Centre for Aging Better, is that there are a lot of older people who have viable offline alternatives to doing a range of things, whether it's communicating, banking, shopping. As one of the participants I spoke to put it, my son told me I can do my banking on it, I can do my shopping on it. I said, are all the shops going to shut, are all the banks going to shut? Now you could say, wow, you can do it better, you can do it more efficiently. Some banks are shutting, some shops are shutting, you can get the better deals elsewhere. I have two responses to that. Number one is that I don't think any of us in this room aim for total efficiency in our lives. We often choose to do things because they're familiar and they're comfortable, and they may be the best or the easiest way of doing it, but they're the way we like to do it. And the other thing is, I don't think we can underestimate these. Going louder as I put my head down. We must not underestimate the prevalence and the importance of proxy use, especially by family members for things like transactions. Again, one of our participants said, when I want to book a hotel room, my son does it for me and I give him the money. I don't want to learn it. How many times do I need to do that a year? Once or twice. I'll ask my son to do it, that's fine. I know some people who couch it in terms of, I guess, setting up dependency, they're not independent. I don't think any of us want to be truly independent. We rely on a web of interdependency and reciprocity. Helping an older relative to do something online is just one part of that. It might be, you might take them to the shops, you might mow their lawn. There are mutual favours. Helping people out, helping relatives out online is part of this. There's an argument that, oh, yes, but people might lose this proxy support. Now, if that proxy support comes from a child or a spouse, if you lose that proxy internet access, that means you've probably lost a lot of other things as well. You are probably suddenly socially excluded in a lot of other ways. So I think when you look at the data, and Ofcom asks this question every year, and year after year, most people who are offline over 65 say, I don't believe it's relevant to me, and nothing will persuade me to get online. Now, as Joyce said, we have to be careful, because sometimes saying I'm not interested, it's not relevant, nothing will convince me, can be a bit of a smokescreen for a lack of confidence, some setbacks in life specific to digital or to do with your experience at school. And we need to recognise that that answer is not necessarily straightforward. But in some cases it is. In some cases people are doing fine offline. I think the very important thing to recognise is that your circumstances can change very suddenly in later life. Retirement, redundancy, bereavement. These are major life changes that can radically affect your access to social resources, and they can change the internet from an optional extra into a vital lifeline in the course of a day. but you might not recognise that yourself. At the moment, I think digital inclusion practice is too focused on standalone digital inclusion. So we have a network of 5,000 online centres around the UK. They do absolutely fantastic work. A lot of them offer a wide range of support services for people with all kinds of needs around employment, learning English, overcoming loneliness and isolation. And I think this recognises the fact that if you need help with digital, you may well need help with other things as well. But then there are support services for older people and programmes. Where I live in Sheffield, there's the Age Better in Sheffield programme funded by Big Lottery, and they help older people who drink too much, who have trouble getting out and about, who are lonely. Digital isn't embedded in those programmes. So on one side you have standalone digital inclusion, and on the other side you have targeted interventions for older people that they come into contact with at these times of major life change. Digital needs to be better embedded in those services if it's to reach the people who aren't going to present themselves for standalone digital skills classes, if we're going to help them to understand how it can be relevant and how it can make a real difference to their lives. Just after I wrote the report last week, I received a letter in the post, which was amazing because it turned out that a lady in the southwest of England hadn't read my report, which is gratifying because it's 60 pages long and I didn't think anyone was going to read all of it. And she also very nicely said, yes, I agree with you. She said, I was happy to live offline. I had a happy life without it. But I'm going to have to give up my car, so I know I'm going to have to start doing a lot more online shopping, and so I decided to take the plunge. So that's an example of these transitional life circumstances that I'm talking about. But one thing she said at the end of the letter really struck me, because she said, because of the generous help I am getting, I'm able to do these things. I'm able to do these things online. I've written back to her to ask her what exactly this generous help was. Did she go to a library? Did she go to an online centre? Is it a friend, a family member? Someone else in the community. But I think the important point is the word generosity. Joyce has touched on this, and there's a lot of research that looks into this. The kind of support that older people or anyone who's getting online for the first time and lacks confidence needs is open-ended, flexible, friendly. It's generous of time. It's generous of energy. I don't think we always achieve that if we focus on digital inclusion as a box-ticking exercise, something that's focused on specific skills, low cost per head, let's get the highest volume of people online. I think if you do that, you get a bit of a spike in interest, a bit of a spike in skills, but you don't instill in people the self-efficacy, the sense that they can learn to do this, and the perceived value, the sense that the internet is relevant for them, because those two things together equal motivation, and that is what is required if older people are to become confident, independent users who will lead themselves forward into digital. Thank you very much. Thank you, Roger.
To really clap more quietly, I think that would be nice.
Don't worry.
So I'm now going to ask Robin Christopherson, the head of digital inclusion at AbilityNet, to speak from, I guess, a different user perspective.
And Archie will sing as well.
Yeah.
Down, Archie, down. Great, so thank you very much indeed. So, got a couple of slides. Down, Archie. Good boy. Great. Which side's the slides on?
The other side.
Yeah. I have a habit of like doing this, and if I'm looking the wrong way, then I look like a bit of an idiot. So great. So yeah, a couple of slides. So I'm going to talk about tech and how important a role it plays in everyone's lives, particularly people with disabilities. And obviously, the older you get, the higher the prevalence of disability and impairment is. So on this first slide, I've got a picture of a standard setup of a computer, monitor, keyboard, mouse, tower, which probably looks quite antiquated these days, but so back in the 80s, everything changed with the advent of the personal computer. Nowadays, 90% of jobs in the UK, and I'm sure it's a similar number elsewhere in the world, have a computer of some shape or form involved in it. And for people with disabilities in particular, it was a real game changer. So me as a blind person, unable to use pen and paper, access printed materials, etc. Now I've got a computer that can talk to me. I can use a scanner, or in these days just an app on my phone to scan in and have read back printed materials, that sort of thing. But the main power of this technology that we see here is, the technical term is redundancy, but it's basically choice. If you can't use a standard keyboard, there are loads of different types, or you could use Dragon, voice recognition, you can talk to your computer. If you can't use a standard mouse, or you can't see the arrow on the screen, there are lots of different choices too. As a blind person, as I say, I use speech output, but you could make the text bigger, you could change the colours, etc. You could get a bigger monitor, that sort of thing. So it's choice, and that's the real power, and that changed everything and really opened up a lot of doors for people for whom the more standard way of doing things was more difficult, more challenging, and obviously it's opened the way for the internet. So if we go on to the next slide. So 10 years ago was the next big wave, the next big revolution, which was smartphones, the advent of the smartphone, the mobile phone. And that took the power of computing with you wherever you go, and that's got obvious benefits. The power of tech to overcome challenges or to broaden your opportunities and your choices, and now with you wherever you go. And not only that, you've got a whole bunch of additional sensors like a camera, accelerometer, GPS, etc. that are able to work hard for you too. And as a blind person, I could literally spend all morning boring you with all the different ways that a blind person could use the camera, for example. I probably use it more than you guys, unless you're selfie addicts perhaps, but, which might be surprising, but the camera is a really, really useful thing when your own eyes don't work. But we're now firmly in the age of extreme computing. We're computing on the edge, all of us on a daily basis when we're using smartphones, because we're now out and about. So before, on the previous slide, if you couldn't see the text on a monitor, you could get a bigger monitor, you could change the environment to make it exactly the way you want. If the sun's on your monitor, you can go and close the blinds or the curtains, etc. So you had a lot of control while you were computing. But now you're out and about, and you've got the sun on a small sheet of glass. If accessibility, which is what AbilityNet are all about and is absolutely crucial to inclusion. Digital inclusion has so many factors, the technology that's in your hand, the way it's customized for you. But if you're trying to access a website or an app that hasn't been designed and coded in an accessible way, and there are very specific guidelines that people need to follow, then it's going to be challenging. I need to have descriptions on images, otherwise I won't know what that image is. On a computer, I need to be able to use the keyboard to go through a web page, for example, or an application. And if it's not coded well, I'm not able to do that. It requires a mouse, so that's a no-go area for me. And as I say, the older you get, the higher the prevalence of disability and impairment right across the spectrum of different conditions is, and so it becomes more and more important. And they're also a lot simpler to use, smartphones, because it's a much smaller screen. There's now the task of taking the same services, the same desire to deliver information, that before you had a great big screen to deliver. You've now got to do that on a much smaller screen. And that's really good for usability, for ease of use, for simplicity, because you have to distill down the experience into a few buttons, a smaller, more concise, simpler to read bit of information. And that's been really, really good. And a lot of people with disabilities, even before they were using smartphones in their hands, they would probably be going to m.facebook.com, for example, which is the mobile version which used to exist before the main site was mobile friendly, because it gave you a much simpler, more distilled experience. And now with smartphones, you don't have to worry about antivirus or rebooting and updating, taking 45 minutes for Windows to do its thing, or for your computer to run slow as it's doing a scan in the background. It became a much simpler experience. But as I say, because we're now computing on the edge, everybody, almost on a daily basis, needs to have inclusion, needs to have inclusive design by people following the accessibility guidelines. Has anyone used their smartphone one-handed this morning already? Yeah. If not this morning, then yesterday. Everyone does, because we all love our smartphones. We're using them all the time, and sometimes your other hand is busy. You know, whatever you do. So, holding a cup of coffee, you know, that's something. So you are temporarily motor or dexterity impaired when you're trying to do things, just holding it and doing it with your thumb. This lady here, she may or may not have a vision impairment, but you know, on a small screen, if there's not a good choice of colours or a decent font size in the app that you're using, she's going to be struggling, just like somebody who needs those same requirements because of a vision impairment 24/7. I could go on and on. Uber, for calling cabs, has to have the most simple usability experience ever, because people call it after a really good night on the town, and they need to get home. So that app needs to be super usable. And for people with a learning difficulty or disability, that same requirement for usability is absolutely essential in everything they use, if they're not going to be able to do that without assistance. So if we go on to the next slide. So what we see here is an example of a smart speaker. These home assistants, this is the Dot, the Echo Dot. I do a daily podcast called Dot to Dot, if anyone's interested, because there are so many things that you can add on to the Echo, or that's built into it already, that can do so much of what we've been talking about being so essential and enabling about technology. You can now do those things without having to read an instruction manual, without having to know whether you have to tap and hold, you know, like a long press to bring up some sort of menu, whether you have to swipe across, whether you have to swipe up to bring up the control panel, or whatever it might be. So even though smartphones are much simpler a proposition than a full PC experience, and really powerful because they're with you all the time, this, you could argue, is the pinnacle of simplicity and usability. Natural conversational access to the internet. You can access the Encyclopedia Britannica in the form of Wikipedia just by asking the A-Lady, Alexa, any questions that you want. You can get the next bus to your local bus, you know, your local bus stops. You can find train times, traffic information, what's on your calendar today. You can play games, you can play music, you can play radio, all of these sort of things just by throwing a question to the air and not even worrying about how you kind of word that phrase, just naturally asking, and it just happens. We go on to the next slide. So there's a real proliferation of these devices. It's an absolute explosion. So we see a number of examples here. Some of them have screens, some of them don't. So if you want to do a video chat with your friends, like Joyce's friend was talking about, then that's fine. Get one with a screen. If you're not into that sort of thing, don't get one with a screen. If you want to see the recipe that you've just asked Alexa or the Google Home, as it's called, the other one, for on the screen, then get one with a screen and it'll come up on the screen. Otherwise it'll just be spoken to you. If you want to get the weather visually as well as auditorily, you know, spoken back, then, you know, the screen would be really useful. You can watch YouTube videos and stuff like that. But at the heart, it's about the conversational internet, just the natural way of talking to the air in your room, in your house, and having something magically happen according to what your whim was, which you asked for. So that's incredibly powerful. Now, there's still a long way to go. They're not perfect. Anyone who uses Siri on your phone will know that they're far from perfect, although I would argue that the Amazon Echo, Alexa, and the Google version are smarter by quite a long way, but we all know that they're not perfect. And what I'm going to show you now is a video clip that I hope Joyce and anyone else in the room isn't going to find disrespectful. It's very kindly meant, and there is actually a valid point which I'll mention in the moment, afterwards, about this. It's a video which provides a satirical look at how useful Echoes are, these voice assistants, to, in this case, the greatest generation, which is the older generation.
The new Amazon Echo has everyone asking Alexa for help.
Alexa, what time is it? What the hell is wrong with this blasted thing? Man!
But the latest technology isn't always easy to use for people of a certain age.
These kids have bought me a busted machine again. Oh, yes, sir.
That's why Amazon partnered with AARP to present the new Amazon Echo Silver, the only smart speaker device designed specifically to be used by the greatest generation. It's super loud and responds to any name even remotely close to yours. The weather.
Allegra, what is the weather outside?
It is 74 degrees and sunny.
Huh?
It is 74 degrees and sunny.
Where?
Outside.
What about it?
The temperature outside is 74 degrees and sunny.
I don't know about that.
Sports.
Clarissa, how many did old Satchel strike out last night?
Satchel Paige died in 1982.
How many did he get?
Satchel Paige is dead.
He's what now?
Died.
Who did?
Satchel Paige.
I don't know about that.
Local news and pop culture.
Anita, what them boys up to across the street?
They are just playing.
They what now?
They are just playing.
You say they just playing now?
Yes, they are just playing.
I don't know about that.
Smart devices like your thermostat.
Alessandra, turn the heat up.
The room is already 100 degrees.
The new Amazon Echo Silver plays all the music they loved when they were young.
Angela played black jazz.
Playing, jazz.
It also has a quick scan feature to help them find things.
Emilia, where did I put the phone?
The phone is in your right hand.
Feature for long rambling stories.
So then I gave him $5, and he said I only gave him $1.
Uh-huh.
I said, I
Uh-huh.
because I only had a 5 and a 1 on me.
Uh-huh.
And that's the $1 right here.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, you tell me who's crazy.
Amazon Echo Silver. Get yours today. I said get yours today.
To order Amazon Echo Silver, send a check or money order to Amazon.com right now.
Okay, so if we go on to the next slide. Great, so just to finish off. Boy. So some handy tips there for Amazon and other smart speaker manufacturers about useful things that you could add on to make them even more useful and easy to use for the greatest generation. But seriously, there are some very useful additions, that could be made to these speakers, but they are incredibly powerful. They're £40 in their cheapest incarnation, the Echo Dot, which is what I've got scattered around my house. And they're so empowering. My sister, as well as being blind, has also very significantly progressed MS, so she's only got her voice. She's completely paralysed, she can move her head and speak, and that's it. So she uses her Echo to control everything around her. Her lights, her curtains, the DVR, the TV. She could control the radio if she had a radio that was able to be, with smart connected radio, but she doesn't need to because the Echo has all the radio stations in the world available through it, just at her command. Music, audiobooks, it will even speak Kindle books as well. So there are so many things that this can do, and it's really lowering the bar when it comes to how digitally savvy you have to be and the affordability of being able to get online, albeit in a limited way. It will increase. Brands are jumping on these platforms, and it will be, if not in the very near future, certainly coming up down the pipe where you will be able to do a full online banking experience through your Echo, for example. So just to finish off then, why have I got a picture of a policeman here? Well, I mentioned earlier about accessibility and how absolutely important it is to have the right technology, but also to have the things that you're accessing done in an inclusive way as well. It's like a chain. If there's any broken link in the chain, then it just doesn't work. And for me as a blind person, the internet is a really, really challenging place. And I would consider myself a power user, so I hate to think what it'd be like for people who are relying on speech output, for example, who are less confident online. So accessibility is so important. I'll just finish off with a call to action by the government. So at the moment it's been a legal requirement for websites and apps to be accessible for at least 15 years, since 2003, arguably even before then as well, but it's been crystal clear that it's been a legal requirement for 15 years, and still 90% of websites don't even meet single A, which is the very lowest threshold, and double A is the legal requirement. but for whatever reason, the government choose not to enforce the law. So if you take 3 milliseconds longer on a parking space than you have paid for, then there will be a traffic warden to descend on you. If you speed, there's going to be speed cameras or police that will, jump on you and give you a fine. Good luck trying not to pay your taxes. Nobody avoids the HMRC. So there are so many areas where enforcement is just seen as part and parcel of what the government do. We would love them to extend that to enforcing the law or the legal requirement for website and app accessibility, because that will that will really make a massive difference. We've had zero take up, well 10% of take up in the last 15 years. Let's see a complete seismic shift in that by people enforcing the law. So let's have the police or the traffic wardens of the internet government, please. You're always talking about revenue and cuts. Let's get some revenue from all of these large, very important websites who are forming such a central part of people's digital existence and yet are still woefully inaccessible. Let's see some revenue and some real movement coming from those guys. And that revenue perhaps could be ring-fenced for disability, access to work. That is a very strapped area. Disability awareness, whatever it might be, that would be really, really useful. So thank you very much.
So, thank you very much. And now we have a double act, Anne Rimmer and Danny Simmons from Barclays UK.
Thank you. Make our way over here. Next one, so close to the side. Many thanks. Having a bit of a follow that moment. That was amazing. It's such a privilege to hear amongst such wonderful speakers. So I'm Anne Rimmer. I'm here from Barclays. Delighted to be here. I've been with Barclays 36 years. That's all my career. I probably came to digital because of my children. So I have 2 girls. Emily is 24 and Lucy is nearly 21. And what they don't know about digital, in terms of how I view the way they live their lives, I don't think is worth knowing. And they are fast, they are confident, and I suppose as millennials they are the Insta generation, and I've learned so much from them. I haven't quite mastered the selfie. I was going to ask Joyce actually if she's mastered the selfie yet. No, I haven't quite mastered the selfie. I've never managed to work out how people manage to look so great taking a selfie. I always look just confused. So, but I continue to try and learn. And if I reflect back on when they were young and growing up with the internet and becoming digitally savvy and sort of persuading us, their mum and dad, that the latest iPhone or whatever it was an absolute must-have accessory. The one overriding emotion that I can remember feeling, and we've heard about it today, Joyce mentioned it, and I think one of the other panellists mentioned it too, but one of my overriding feelings was fear actually, because I actually had no idea what they were doing and what they were accessing and how they were doing it. And I felt very worried for their safety. So actually I think a lot of the things we've talked about today and heard about today actually are true of a lot of generations, but I think also heightened for this population. So what do we think about this issue in Barclays? So I hope many of you know already that Barclays takes this topic very, very seriously. The reason why there's 2 of us here today is because it wouldn't be right for us to come and talk at an event like this without talking about our wonderful digital legal population, 18,000 of them. And Joyce and I were chatting earlier about when this started and how it started and the impact that we now feel we have in such a positive way. And Danny's going to talk about that in a bit more detail because she lives and breathes this every day. So we absolutely remain committed to this issue, and we know that commercial organisations such as Barclays have got a huge role to play. We have massive reach and influence in society, with external groups, with regulators, with government, etc. And it's really important that we use that leverage and we use the reach that we have amongst consumers to help support, inform, educate. Financial inclusion and digital inclusion are increasingly entwined, even with a strong physical presence, which we remain committed to retaining through branches, telephony, etc. Customers with digital access do have more choice, they do have more immediacy of control, they do have more flexibility around access, when, where, etc. And the onset of open banking is going to make this increasingly more important. So this issue isn't going to go away, it's not going to go away for society, and it's not going to go away for big commercial organisations, in the part that Barclays will continue to play in that is really, really important. We know that consumers feel very anxious about digital. We know that there's increased anxiety around data sharing, around what that means, the opportunities but also the threats. People don't understand it. We were at a session yesterday where we were talking about open banking. Now, we've been thinking about this in Barclays for quite a long time, but there were some questions from colleagues of mine that suggest that even our own workforce is feeling the need to be much better educated, and we have that responsibility to do that so that we can then do that for our customers. So I mentioned Barclays and our digital eagles. We've been at the forefront of digital inclusion now for a number of years. We have 18,000 digital eagles across the country, and our lovely Danny is here today to talk a bit about the work that they do. Danny.
Thank you. Barclays Digital Eagles offer digital knowledge, solution, alternatives and support to our colleagues, our customers and our entire communities. From helping children how to code to helping grandparents how to tweet. We are there every step of the way through your digital journey. We ensure that you build up your digital confidence while staying safe online. If you're looking for more from the internet, you can learn through our online courses. We have practical guides to help you do more online, and you can book sessions in your local branches with our digital eagles. They are very informal and are face-to-face. Our Tea and Teach, so we have an initiative called Tea and Teach. We have Barclays DigiSave, and we now have support bars in some of our branches. These are designed to help you build your confidence with our services, the internet and computers as a whole. Barclays Digital Eagles started 5 years ago when we put iPads within our branches. Unfortunately, not all of our colleagues knew how to use this new technology, and we needed to create a strategy as soon as possible to help support our colleagues. Ultimately, if we can't support our colleagues, how can we support our customers? The Digital Eagles were born. We started off as a small group of people travelling across the country to each branch, supporting our colleagues within their digital journey. We created a platform called Digital Wings, which is an online website that is free to absolutely everybody. Digital Wings at first was internal just for our colleagues, but because of its success, we decided to make it free for everybody. And that involves from the very beginning of the internet right through to IBM Analytics. There is something there for everybody. And that is who we are and what we do. We are there to support you absolutely every step of the way. We do also work with organisations such as the Met Police and Action Fraud to make sure that you get the right education, the right tools and the right knowledge to not only get you online, but ensure that you stay safe online. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. I think you've got a bit more. Just on and what Danny's talked about, it's important as well to note that this isn't just for Barclays customers, this is for anybody, so everybody's welcome. So moving on from the theme then, we know that digital presents both risks and opportunities for consumers, and in particular, the generation of older consumers can be more vulnerable to the risks that a digital world can pose. And despite more of this population being online than ever before, millions we know still do not feel confident in this space. Barclays believes it's important to maintain an omni-channel presence, so physical as well as digital channels, and we continue to be proud of our achievements in ensuring that our services are fully accessible to all through our channels. Digital safety is a responsibility we take very seriously. I really hope you've seen recently the new DataSafe and DigiSafe campaigns that have been on the TVs, etc. We take that part of our responsibility very seriously. Digital inclusion does allow consumers to have choice and access to a full range of services across industries. And socially, as we've heard as well, there are many benefits through forums, networks. Potentially, these are areas helping to address topics such as isolation and loneliness, which all of us can be exposed to at any time in our lives, including the older population. I think we've already heard James talk about the vital lifeline, which I think is really relevant here. And I liked the way Joyce talked about the power of the peer group to help in this area. The approach, I think she called it slow repetition, and it doesn't work when you sit down and you go through a course or a set of learning that's been designed for a population that maybe think and learn in a different way to this generation. So the power of the peer group in bringing together groups of people around this topic, I think, is really powerful. I'll leave just with one lovely example from one of my team, Tammy, who couldn't be here today with me, but she does lots of great work in this space as well, as does Danny. And Danny works in a number of groups with a particular passion she has for older people, and she's passionate about helping them with digital knowledge. She was fortunate enough to meet recently a group of Chelsea pensioners. And they were telling her about their experiences of the internet, of digital, and the way in which they were leveraging this for the greater good of their community and their population. And Tammy told me that this group could teach us a thing or two about internet dating, and I thought that was just a lovely point to reflect on in terms of the power of digital and the way in which it can connect people for the good of those populations. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. So, a great set of, I think, personal and practical and sort of tech and knowledge sort of inputs, finishing very nicely with very personal. And I think, we all know, it brings us back to where I started, that the reason that people get online is because it does things that they want to do. So dating is a good example of one of the things, but it's all about doing things you want to do. It's not being, for very few of us, is it being online for the sake of being online. So, I'd now like to invite people to ask questions of our panel. Because we are live streaming, so there are people watching this online, I'd like you to wait until the mic comes to you before you ask your question, so that people online can also hear your question. But can I get a show of hands of people who've got questions? Super, that's going to start us off.
Good morning. I'm writing a piece of software for, I think what is ending up as aging, but started off as a dementia and Alzheimer's software. And I found, working with the Alzheimer's Association, there's an amazing kind of gender issue rather than a technical issue, in that the test groups I'm going to, there's an instinctive reaction, oh no, that's my husband's domain. And there's a sort of an interesting age gap where it says, no, I don't do computers, dear. And that's come as a real shock, the fact that there's almost like an abrogation of responsibility. And then you say, what did you do while you were working? And the answer is, I worked for Lucas and I spent 20 years data inputting, or I worked in the accounts department. But there's a kind of perception of the fact they haven't worked with computers, or that it's somebody else's problem. I don't know whether that's something I've found or whether that's sort of generic in an ageing issue with digital.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of questions, because it may be that they come together and people can pick up different ones. It also gives the panel a chance to think about whether they want to answer any of those questions. I think there are two at the front.
Thank you very much. I've been involved for quite the last 10 years in many meetings and how older people can learn. One of the things that struck me as a very good way for an older person was the TV PC. Do any of you know whether that's been developed any further in this country? Because I feel if older people can manage a control for a television, the next step is easily to use the control to get email on the television screen.
There's one just in front of you.
I think the thing that just occurred to me is that one of the points which really probably hasn't been explored is that for many older people, perhaps cost is a barrier. For example, when I got broadband, I noticed how much my telephone bill, because it included broadband and phone. And I just think that if people are on a basic state pension, that might well be just something they can't afford. So that's just a thought to throw into the pot, really.
I think we have one more, and then I'll get the panel to think which ones those are to pick up.
Sharon Tynan from AGK London. Just a little response to that lady there. When I speak to older people, I don't necessarily encourage them to get broadband at all. I encourage them to get the cheapest Wi-Fi only tablets, Android ones, and if they're feeling confident and mobile, they can go down to the Witherspoons or the library or wherever there's free Wi-Fi, and then they don't have to pay broadband, but of course they mustn't do any banking online on that free broadband. I wasn't going to, it's not really a question, it's more of a kind of, well, it is a question. Around funding, whether we like it or not, the only way we're all going to do all this stuff is supporting somebody to engage people and get people together. AGK London, we're the London regional organisation, and many funders are looking at the digital exclusion heat map when they look at where they're going to do the funding. And from a London perspective, it looks like digital exclusion is very low, and therefore it's quite tricky to get funding for to do digital projects with older people in London because of the issues around looking at the digital inclusion heat map.
Okay, so we've got one that James, I wonder if you might want to, or Robin, that you might want to pick up around the PCTV, the kind of previous bits of approaches to this. But maybe Joyce, could I come to you? Has it been your experience that women in later life are more likely to have handed responsibility for some of these things over to their husbands, or less likely to feel that they can engage? And what might we do about that?
Is it interesting that my experience has been the opposite? That with
we got the mics.
Maybe it just happens that but so often the men have opted out. I think because they felt important and they knew how to do everything, suddenly they can't do the internet, and so they don't want to know because they look a fool, and their wife does it, and they let their wife do it. So many of my friends, that's what's happening. Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's a society thing about male, female. I'm not going to look a fool if I can't do it, so I won't do it. Yeah. So many.
I mean, I would have said the same actually, just based on my own parents and others that I know. But I think it's a very, very interesting observation, and I don't know, Danny, if we see anything interesting in this area in our branches when we run sessions, whether there's any difference between men and women engaging on this.
Yeah, it's very evenly split. I mean, my parents are in their 60s, and my mum is forever on Facebook, whereas my dad hates it and refuses to get it. But he will happily do his online banking and his mobile banking, and I think it comes down to how social you are as a person, because my dad isn't. And it's all about preference, I think. But in terms of there being a gender gap, that isn't something that I have witnessed. No, that's...
Yeah, I'd say the same.
Yeah.
And I guess, Robin, did you want to pick up on that, or?
Well, that and then the other.
Yeah, great.
So, well, just a passing comment, which is that I think that women tend to be very much the person who is into communication of the pair and would like to keep in touch with friends, family, etc. And obviously, all of these different channels, whether it's a PC or a tablet or an Echo, are a really good way of keeping in contact with people. So, that's a driving force in getting online or getting digital in our experience as well. But to talk about the PC TV or TV PC, they do exist. They're not very accessible or inclusive in our experience. Now there are other options. So Samsung do a line of TVs which have a talking menus, talking EPG, electronic program guide, etc. And they have access to the internet and that sort of thing. So that might be an option, although they tend to be the higher end TVs. And one thing, if you haven't got a smart TV, is to just buy, for example, a Fire Stick, which is the Amazon Fire TV. On a little stick, you stick it in the side of it's like £35. Stick it in one of the HDMI ports on your TV, your dumb TV, and it will give you access to a whole range of TV channels, to the internet, a range of different apps that you can run on your newly smartened TV. You can also use the remote control to call up things by voice as well, and it's got speech on it if you have low or no vision. You can magnify it. There are so many accessibility features built in. So that would be my recommendation. As opposed to a full-blown PC, this is a much simpler proposition, much cheaper entry level, and you can even use your voice to call up, play the latest episode of EastEnders or whatever it might be. So and you can tie it in with your Amazon Echo device as well. So you can call things up even if you haven't got the remote that comes with it. So yeah, that would be my choice.
Okay. Cost, James, that might be. Cost is only cited by about 3% of people as the main reason why they're not online. Slightly more cited, for any reason, but only a very few people say it's the only reason they're not online. And for me, one of the most interesting pieces of research on this came out a couple of years ago. Ofcom commissioned some research into people who only used smartphones, and this included some roofless homeless people who were in some cases spending about a quarter to a third of their income on staying connected on a smartphone because it was so valuable to them. So I think when you look at this cost benefit analysis, is it worth it is very much in the eye of the holder. Now that is not in any way to belittle the fact that some people are on low incomes, and I think it's less about the devices and more about the ongoing commitment to broadband. So yeah, absolutely suggestion to use free Wi-Fi I think is a good one, or to get a 4G contract. I think it very much depends on individual circumstances and people's access to advice and support, whether it's through family or whether it's through an organisation like an online centre.
Did your research reach out to say a basic pension? Someone just getting a basic pension?
Yeah, we spoke to people on low incomes. It didn't. The approach I took was, I try and see if these things came up naturally, and if they didn't, I'd prod a bit in that direction. It didn't seem to be that significant. But as a practitioner, which I was before I was a researcher, I have come across people who've say that is a barrier. I think the solution from a practice point of view is to make sure that the best possible advice is available and accessible over the long term, so people can get the best deals, not get something that's unnecessary for them. It exists.
Because you can get free internet access in the library, because libraries are shut down.
Yeah, absolutely. So Joyce wanted to pick up on that, and then I'm going to open it up for another.
I'd really like to comment on one or two things that sort of overlapping a little bit into this. It hasn't actually been mentioned, but businesses, the NHS and government actually all need us to be online, because that's where they're going. They're moving the whole thing. Therefore, this older population represents a growing market, really, that ought to be online for businesses and government in there, particularly, for example, for telehealth. There's going to be a whole lot of telemonitoring, telehealth, and therefore I think it's up to them to make it simple enough for us to use, and they have to do that. And I would congratulate, for example, the car tax site. I can actually do that. It's simple. I'm happy to do it. It's just straightforward and simple, and I don't get confused on it. Other things, for example, why on earth have I got to create a whole site, booking, password and everything just to buy a theatre ticket? You know, that is driving me potty. I can ring up Virgin, buy a train ticket. Why have I got to create a site and remember another password in order to get a train ticket? I think that kind of thing has got to be stopped. But I think it's up now to the government and businesses to actually find the simplest possible way of getting us in. And if I were actually trying to teach people, if setting up a class, I'm not going to have done that kind of thing. I would certainly, with the women, I would go, as we were talking, the family gossip line, you know, the Facebook, the social Twitter, because that's, and that sounds big, but it is actually the way in for them. Once they're confident about doing something they enjoy, then they know the way around the board and they can get there. I think for a lot of men, I would get them into sport. If they can find their sport results and all those things, then they'll be confident on the whole thing and can move on to what's needed. And I think that. And the last one I'd just like to comment on, someone mentioned it, about internet dating. I think certainly for older people, actually the way forward. In fact, a lot of you don't realise that actually when you're old and alone, you actually do want a partner, because it doesn't stop, it's always a partner. And a lot of old people are on for that. That's a jolly good reason for getting people online, and that could be promoted. And one last comment, I'm absolutely delighted to hear about the Amazon, what is it?
Fire stick.
What?
Fire stick?
No,
oh, sorry, the Echo.
The Alexa. Now that to me is the next huge leap forward. I can hear that is the sort of answer. It terrifies me to even think about going and buying one, because I walk into a shop and I have one of those, and then what? I'll go home and I'll look at it, and I just don't know where to begin to start on it. I need an enormous amount of help to get me, but I can see that it's great.
I think that's a really important point actually, and a lot of the barriers actually could be overcome if there was a way in which consumers could be helped to get things set up.
Absolutely.
Because the setup stage, often for very good reasons, but it does prove complex and challenging. And we know this with Barclays Mobile Banking. It's important that the setup does include some level of friction, if you want to call it that, because it has to be safe and secure, and we have to make sure that we're only providing access to the customer, so there has to be good levels of authentication inherent in that. Once it's set up, I firmly believe it's very simple, very convenient and very, very accessible.
To touch on that though, YouTube. So YouTube is a video platform, and it is absolutely fantastic for how-to guides. And they are people, I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out how to bleed my radiator at home. So I searched how to bleed a radiator on YouTube, and it taught me how to do it. It was fantastic. So for those of you that do want to embrace new technologies, there are videos on YouTube that will talk you through even how to unbox a new piece of technology to set it up. And the beauty of YouTube is you can pause it, play it as and when you're ready. It doesn't go too quick. You can do it at your own pace. And if one video doesn't work for you, there are more out there than just that one. So for those of you that are a bit perhaps fearful or shy, YouTube is a fantastic starting point, even if you just want to research something before taking that plunge.
One comment. I don't know how you get off YouTube in order to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, my panel have completely run out of control.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, well, just on that YouTube thing, there is a bit of a chicken and egg situation there. But, I mean, it's the go-to place. My children will, don't worry, Dad, I can look on YouTube. And there's always a video on YouTube. And my wife has become a firm convert to taking photographs of things, you know, that you'll pass, that you need to remember, make a note of. She's brilliant for that, or doing a screen capture on your phone for that. So yeah, really, really good. There was something else I was going to say. Oh yeah, If you want to have assistance in the home, AbilityNet run a network of volunteers, brilliant name, IT Can Help, Itch, the Itch Volunteer Network. So give AbilityNet's free phone number a call. We will come to your house. We will help you over that initial hurdle of getting online, finding out the equipment that you need, because not only are we able to help with standard equipment in getting people online, setting up your router, etc., they also know about disability and impairment and customizing your equipment for you, finding the right bit of additional software or a special mouse or whatever it might be to help you overcome any impairments you might have. So yeah, Itch, search online for the Itch network or give our free phone number a call.
Sorry, I just wanted to say on the I'm looking for YouTube Live, and it's the same in my family. My dad thinks I'm a genius because the printer breaks, the boiler breaks. I just Google it. I don't know how to do it myself. I think that the experience of education and the experience of what it means to learn has changed radically over the past few decades. I think a lot of people who use our online centres went to school at a time when learning was I tell you stuff and then you remember the stuff. And also, if you didn't learn, then people didn't think about, well, are there better ways? You know, the responsibility for teaching is on the teacher. There is no such thing as a bad pupil, there's only teachers who cannot find the right way of explaining things. But I think, this includes some of the people we spoke to in our research, that people who've had such a dispiriting experience of school-age education that they've not wanted to engage in learning ever since. And they not only need their confidence boosted, they need to be taught that they are just as capable as anyone else of learning, but they also need to be taught a new philosophy of learning, not, you know, I'm a tutor, I'm going to tell you how this computer works and then you're going to go away and do it. But being taught this pedagogy of you have this delightful responsibility of finding out the answer yourself. Now I think that can be very intimidating. What if I find the wrong video? Well, you learn to look for the right video. You learn the information literacy, to use the technical term, that helps you navigate not all YouTube videos are created equal. You realise that you might need to look at 3, 4 or 5 before you find one that's like, yeah, that's explaining it in the right level of detail for me. But learning to do that is a skill, and I think it takes time and patience to shift people's perception of themselves as a learner. I'm sorry, just following on the thing about setup, I think it's very important. I think our research and others' research has also shown that ongoing troubleshooting is incredibly important as well. If you have a 6-week course, people learn some basic skills, fine, they go away. 3 months later, they have a problem. You might call it a minor problem, but if it stops them in their tracks, that's it. And I think that is often a factor that causes people's usage to lapse. So troubleshooting support needs to be available for people in the long term.
Great. I'm going to pick up on a couple of questions that have come through Slido or online, which are on that kind of thing about how we learn. And I think it's right that, you know, for a lot of people who are not online now, one of the things that we do know from the data is generally that's people who are poorer, it's people who've had a less good employment history, it's people who've had less good educational history. So even if when you did learn, somebody stood at the front and told you, and you didn't enjoy it much. So I think it's a combination of how it was delivered to you, and also what it was like for you. So we are in a world with IT, with online, it's a different kind of teaching. We've got a couple of questions about that. So one of them was, is peer-to-peer learning then the best way for people in later life to share and gain skills? So learning from your peers, learning from Joyce or other people who are like you. But there was also a question specifically for Joyce, but I think it'd be great to hear from Danny's experience as well. What sorts of skills how have you learned? Have you been to sessions? Have you been to ways of getting support and teaching that helped you? What do you think is the right sort of new way of learning this new set of skills? So I'll start with Joyce, but Danny, it'd be great to hear your experience.
I think peer learning is one thing. That's just because you're then in a comfortable group. So you don't feel a fool because they're feeling that we're all laughing at being, and if you keep it fun and everybody comfortable, there's nobody superior because we're all in the same boat. That is the advantage of a peer group. it doesn't matter what age the tutor is, so long as they've got that empathy with the problems you have. They understand the retention problems, they understand the need to translate everything, to repeat things, and that you're going to be asking, well, just what is an app? You know, this is what sounds like a silly question until you don't know. And it's that sort of getting that kind of group together. And the other thing that I really would like to have somewhere is a line or something, it probably exists but I don't know, where when I don't know the answer to that silly question, something like I can't get back onto Twitter because I haven't done something to my Twitter account. I don't know what they're talking about. You know, I shall never now be able to get back into whatever it was because I don't know the term that they're telling me to do and I have no idea how to do it. And I've tried looking it up and get some very involved, nerdy answers. Yeah, I want somebody I can, at the end of the line, that can talk it through with me. You know. I have a next door neighbour that acts like that and reward him with a glass of wine. But I actually want a helpline that speaks English.
Can I?
James, do you want to, and then Danny.
I mean, peer support, I think, has the potential to be an incredibly powerful model. And when I was a practitioner, I would sometimes, when I speak to classes, we'd set up and say that we can't be here forever. We don't have the funding to be here forever. And they were like, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. And I think funded programs, if we want peer mentoring to happen, that needs to be something that like practitioners and the people they're supporting need to go in with that mindset. I'm going to be here and I'm going to pass responsibility over to you. I think that can create extra capacity, and as Joyce says, being in that comfortable environment, learning from people like yourself can be a very, very good way to learn. I don't think it's a quick or an easy or a cheap solution though. I'm going to keep going back to funding as an issue because I asked some of our online centres as part of the research, have you done this and how did it go? There was one centre in the northeast, A1 Community Works, one of our most engaged centres. They had spent 12 months setting up a peer-led session. They'd trained some of the more active and engaged members of the group as digital champions to help others. They provided setup support, troubleshooting support. They just needed to remain involved to a certain extent for a very, very long time. No one was expecting, and I think no one should expect, that a peer support group should be involve people who are all experts. That's not the strength of the peer support model.
The opposite, we're fools together. Yeah.
The peer support group needs some kind of long-term external support to be effective. So I think that's a very interesting model, but I don't think we can wave a magic wand and say, brilliant peer support. We've got lots of free extra capacity.
Danny, do you want to say a bit about your...
Yeah, I think, so my personal experience, I remember going back 10 years when smartphones were launched, I was very adamant that I didn't want a phone without buttons. I loved buttons. I loved being able to text with buttons. And I couldn't get my head around how I was going to text with a phone with no buttons. And it was forced upon me because I used my phone to listen to music. And if I wanted to keep doing that, I had to buy a phone without buttons. And that was before we had initiatives like Digital Eagles. And I sat down with one of my friends who had one of these all singing, all dancing, no button phones. And I asked them to teach me how to use it. And luckily they did. And I've always been very mindful of my first experience with something that I really struggled with. And really simplifying down what I do. And our TN teachers are really good examples of that. And one of the things that we ask our digital eagles to be mindful of is their audience, and never assume someone knows how to do something. We've worked with organisations where they're now having to, so the benefits are now all online, and some people that are now having to enrol for benefits have never used a computer in their life. And one of the communities that I visited, they had someone who thought that to use a mouse they had to physically pick up the mouse and put it on the computer screen. And that's what we have to be mindful of. So that peer-to-peer is essential in that sense. I couldn't tell that person to go and YouTube something because they wouldn't know what YouTube is, they wouldn't even know how to switch a computer on. So at that point it's really essential that we're mindful of who our audience is and what level they are. Ultimately, a teen teaches when someone will come to us with usually a specific problem or they're not sure how to do something. We do have online guides are brilliant, but would you know how to find them or where to find them? It's all great and well saying go online, but where'd you go? So barclays.co.uk has a digital confidence page, and they have guides you can print out, and they are for anybody and everyone. You don't have to log in, it doesn't ask you for any details, they are free for everybody. Digital Wings in itself is its own platform, and when I mentioned YouTube is just a website, so you can type in youtube.co.uk or .com, and it is an essential, a search engine for videos. But not everybody likes to learn that way. I've always found that there's 3 different ways of learning: visual, audio, and physically doing something. For me, I got asked yesterday at a school if I had a degree in coding because I was teaching children how to code. I left high school with minimal GCSEs. I learn by physically doing things for myself, and I find that a lot of people within the sessions that I run are very, very similar. That doesn't mean that we don't provide literature. That doesn't mean that we don't provide a visual way of learning either. So it's all about, for us as Digital Eagles, is being mindful of our audience and mindful that different people learn in different ways.
Lovely. So, I mean, I think in different ways, a lot of what people have said, a lot of what our panelists said is about starting where people are. So, what is it that people actually want? Certainly, that's one of the things we found in our research. What is it that people actually want? What is it that's valuable to you? So, you know, the lovely discussion about, well, for some older women, it's more about keeping in touch. My role in the couple was to be the person that kept in touch. Certainly, if, God forbid, my wife leaves me or dies, I will have no friends. But absolutely for sure. It's totally her job to keep us connected to anybody. I fill in forms, so that's, you know, we've definitely, you know, it's not just a generational thing. I think it's easy to fall into these, but understand where people are. So if it's sport, if it's gossip, if it's I just want to know how to do it, I'm frightened of it, starting where people are and what it is that they need to get them through the next step, but then going again and again and again, and being really mindful of the sort of accessibility in terms of sensory impairments and in terms of kind of physical impairments, but also accessibility. Joyce started with it, language, and are we describing these things in ways that make any sense to me at all? And one of the things that I've certainly heard repeated a lot is repetition, 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 and you know, that's when you start, but it's also when you get going, and it's also as you're going, the opportunity to just have another support. And I think it's a good point that, yes, you could get that from peers, you could get that from friends, you could get that from some other network, but that network needs supporting. It's not free, even if it's Joyce's glass of wine occasionally for her neighbour, it's not completely free to get that ongoing support for people that keeps them going. What I'd like to ask you to do in our last few minutes, either on a piece of paper, if you've been given a piece of paper, put your hand up if you haven't, or on Slido. If you have got a new thought about what might help to tackle digital exclusion in later life, then please pop it on Slido so that we can see whether this debate and this discussion has helped you think about the issue differently, or whether it's confirmed what you came into the room with, both of which would be absolutely fine. So if anybody, while you're doing that, has a burning final question, do put your, oh yes, there we go, a couple of burning final questions, do put your hands up, and we will do a couple of last questions, and we will leave at 10:30. So I need you very quickly to give your 5-word answer, and we'll have 2 burning questions. Oh, possibly 3, because again, my panel are out of control.
I think it's not about a question, it's a comment. I think we have to be very careful. We become sort of very domineering, tell all older people need all those gadgets because it's going to improve their life. Actually it doesn't. No. We have to be tolerant and accept some people are quite happy in the life they're leading. They can now read all the books and never go around when they were working. I see how much time I waste. I look at all my books personally and think, I die before I read half of them. I go for 5 minutes on the computer, I'm still there now and a half later. And there are people who don't want it. They're happy with themselves, watching a bit TV. All the people often listen a lot to the radio. They have their favorite programs. I can go on and on. So we have to be very, very careful not to be people, oh, you would be much better, much busier if you had a computer. No, some wouldn't.
Point well made, and I think that's certainly where we came into the room, but I'm seeing lots of active nodding from across the panel. David and then as well.
Hi, I'm David from Hello Daisy. To answer one lady's question about having a TV that can connect with the internet, we created a really simple device called Hello Daisy, and you can connect, and it's a private social network, and it's super easy. But my question is this, and I really like what you're talking about with Echo and Dot. I was speaking with a hearing consultant specialist, and he said one of the big issues is that after about the age of 60, there's a serious sort of degradation of hearing. And how do you feel about that, given that voice is so big and so pervasive?
I think that's pretty for you, isn't it, Robin?
Thanks. Really good question. I talked about digital inclusion, and absolutely, you're right. For these products to be viable, for people that have a range of impairments, they have to be inclusive. Now, it actually does require a certain amount of interfacing using a separate device, the companion app, as it's called. So when you buy an Echo, you don't have to touch your phone or a tablet, but there is a companion app where you can make changes to settings, etc. Now, if you've got a hearing impairment, everything that is spoken on the Echo comes up on screen on that companion app. If you've got an Echo with a screen, you can set it so that it would come up on there as well. If you have a speech impairment, then you can train it to better understand, or if you come from Glasgow, you can have it better understand by going into the history of what you've said to it and what it thought you said, and correcting its misunderstanding of how you said it. Now that would take a bit of technical skill, so that might be something that you would go through with a friend or a relative in the initial instance before it starts to understand you better. If you can't speak at all, you can still interact with these voice assistants by typing to it. So Lost Voice Guy, who won Britain's Got Talent earlier, he could interact with these voice assistants quite effectively as well. It actually is really good at understanding synthetic speech like he uses too. So Professor Hawking, for example, could have interfaced with his Echo too. So yeah, there's a range of different options there. It can also drive Bluetooth-enabled digital hearing aids. So instead of speaking it out to the room, it can be typed directly into your hearing aid with the settings, the different audio settings, the gain of particular frequencies, etc., that's optimal for your digital hearing aid.
Brilliant, thank you. If it's incredibly quick.
Yes, very quick. We're a 5D digital platform. We're designing software for artificial intelligence for children. And our platform is very useful for this type of problems you announce here, because the similarity with the young children and elderly people is almost the same. Just the range of problem a little bit wider here. And what you said here, it can be very easily integrated in one simple platform. All that YouTube and banking and everything, and I think it should be not commercial, not profitable. So otherwise, it will be business. So that's what I have to say.
Joyce, I'm going to have the last word.
I just wanted to comment that I walked into this room today and they asked me if I would go and do a vox pop. I have no idea what it's talking about. It's on an organ stop, so I know that. And you just asked people to use a slider. I don't know what that is either. Immediately you're cut off because you don't know the current jargon.
Yeah. So, I think there's a thread there, isn't there, that, a number of people have said, so the technology moves, and it moves really quickly, and some of those movements, as Robin said, are really helpful for lots of people, But if we're not mindful of, as it moves, the thing you knew now isn't the thing that you need to know. So you have to be able to help everyone keep up. And I think there's been a nice thread, which is one of the things that's come up here, I think, about businesses and providers. So there's been a nice thread about it is actually probably the people who are designing this technology and the people who are putting things out in the world responsibility to help everybody keep up, just as much as it is each of our responsibility. I was really struck by this thought that in this world, a lot of it is up to us to keep up and to work out, well, how do you search YouTube and how do you work out which is the right video? A lot of the weight is put on you as an individual, and I think there's a nice thread in some of your comments, some of your responses about sharing that responsibility and recognising that indeed it is in the interest, as Joyce said, of businesses and government and service providers to support people to be online. So they ought to do a good job of it. I'm probably going to leave the final word, because it is one of the things that we came into the room with, that for many people, they've got ways of benefiting from the services and goods that you can get online via a family member, via a friend, and that's fine. Or they don't do it at all, and that's also fine. I think what we've discovered is that for some people, the thing that's fine now stops being fine because something happens to you, because the person you relied on, you can't rely on them anymore, or because the assumption that you made about your physical capability stops being true. And that can happen, as James said, very suddenly. And that, I think, is where this idea that we need to be able to come in quickly, whether it's Barclays Digital Eagles, whether it's the NHS, whether it's charities, we need to be able to come in, whether it's the Itch Network, whatever it is, we need to be able to come in quickly and support people, but stick around and support people for the long term. So I think we've heard lots of really, really important, interesting things from all our panellists. I want you to join me in thanking all of you. There are, of course, because it is an event, evaluation forms, and my colleagues will kill me if I don't ask you now to fill in the evaluation form and hand it out as the price of leaving the room. Thank you all very much.